Hey, everybody, welcome to today's episode. I am absolutely thrilled. I've been wanting to talk to Landon Starbuck about her work and advocacy for children for a couple of years now. I've watched her, I've watched what God has really done in her life and how she stepped out. More importantly, I've watched the change that has started to take place because of what she has done. Landon is the founder of Freedom Forever. She's an advocate for children fighting against child exploitation, child abuse, and trafficking. You're going to be astounded by some of the things that you learn today, but I think even more importantly, you're going to understand some of the nuances of the conversation a little bit better and maybe learn about some pieces and parts that you don't know about and you haven't thought about. Some real issues that our kids are facing on social media and with a lot of these apps. So let's lean in, let's be informed, because this kind of information is going to help you take action. Hey, Landon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, I've been looking forward to talking to you for a long time. I've followed your work. You are a fierce advocate, and we're going to get into your work in a minute. But I would love for the audience to hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your family, and really this story that prompted you to step into this work of an advocate as we kind of get in and dig into what those things are.
Sure. Well, I went to Hollywood when I was 18, very naive, wanting the Hollywood dream. I was a singer-songwriter. And when I moved there, I thought, if I just worked hard enough that I would be able to make it faster. And what I really uncovered was a sexual quid pro quo culture where women who would take off their clothes or perform sexual favors or attend parties would have their careers, elevated very quickly. And I thought, I'm just going to have to work harder. And I paid my dues. I was producing, I was interning, I was doing everything to try to make my way up in that industry. And eventually, I was a Billboard charting artist. I charted on having a hit across the country. And that's really when I was presented with some options, and I was asked to do things that violated my integrity, violated the core of who I was. And I was faced with this moral predicament of, do I want my career that badly? And to give people an example, I was told that if I would star in this music video with this very big, well-known boy band, that I would get to go on tour with them. And that would have been like a, home run for my career.
Game
and
changer.
It was a stadium tour. Yeah, game changer, exactly. And I showed up on set and they had this rack full of lingerie. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, that's not for me. I'm not comfortable wearing that. And they looked at me and very matter of factly said, okay, well, we'll find somebody who will. And that was kind of my big, first aha moment, eye opener of like, wait a minute, this can't be how it works. So it was subsequently a lot of experiences like that made me come to the realization that is how the system operates. And I'm sure there's been some very rare exceptions to that, but that has been my experience. And I think we've heard so many, even stars coming out talking about the exploitation in childhood, which goes back to, childhood, these young stars.
That's right.
So now it's like, it's up front mainstream and it's being validated, my experience that so many have had. But really what I decided to do was start a family. And I realized I didn't want to be a part of the system that exploits kids and it even exploits women. And I wanted to be a role model for my own children, and I wanted to be a present mom for my own children. But this urge, this I guess dream God put in my heart of like, I want to fight, I want to change it, was still there. And I thought that I would just be fighting Hollywood and the exploitation and being a sounding alarm for that. And that's really when I became trauma informed and understood that this problem is not just in Hollywood. It's in every industry. It's in every American city across our nation. And I served on various boards and organizations and ultimately decided to start my own nonprofit. And that's when I really became an advocate on steroids, just doing whatever I could to make a difference with my platform and my voice.
Incredible. So once you sort of stepped out, you've had a family, and your family, what age and stage is your family right now?
So I have 4 children. My oldest is 16, a senior in high school, and my youngest is almost 10 months old. And then my middle are 12 and 8. So girl, boy, got my hands full, and it's just beautiful chaos every day.
That's so awesome. So once you've now had your family, you've decided, hey, I'm gonna really be a voice for this. So I'm curious as to what was the first sort of action you took Was it just speaking? Was it writing? Were you connecting with people? Because you're doing so much right now. But I'm so big on helping parents understand, like, just take the next step in whatever God's showing you to do. And so I'm curious as to sort of like, what was the process to step into where you are now?
Sure. Well, I think a big turning point for me was when we were living in California. I started looking at the school curriculum and comprehensive sexuality education, or
Yeah.
CSE, and social emotional learning, SEL, and how it was kind of being baked in under these surreptitious, you know, uh, agendas and words, and it was very confusing and difficult to unpack. And I was having a really hard time myself understanding it. But once I've really uncovered what was happening and this agenda that was in the school systems and even the private school systems where we had our children, I wanted to sound the alarm and inform other parents. And really what happened was a gaslighting. Just even friends that I had known since just a very young age with our children, raising our kids, they're like, that's not happening, you're exaggerating,
Right.
there's no
Yep.
sex ed, there's no pro sex work education or agenda, this is just you're just exaggerating. And it was just really difficult. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, if people are so closed-minded and closing their eyes to this problem, like, how do you actually stop it? What kind of change can you make? And that's really when I decided, okay, where can I be the most impactful with the tools God gave me? And that's when I started to look at other organizations. What are they doing? And I started, working at different organizations in different capacities. Like, oh, I see the problems here. I see why this issue is getting, out of control with domestic violence shelters, and how those children and women are disproportionate chances of being trafficked and exploited. I understand this. So it started all connecting. And I think it was those experiences that really helped me to then have the knowledge and foundation to launch my own nonprofit. And that's really what we seek to do, is identify the vulnerabilities so we can rescue children before they need rescuing. So we're not just a rescue raid organization, we're stopping it before it starts. And that happens with legislation and educating parents, and the film we did as well helped to achieve that.
Yeah, I love the fact that you really took a stance for preventative, because I think so often, we really are going in behind, and it's so necessary and so needed. And as we all learn more and more, and so many mama bears, that are just taking my kids to school, like, wait, what is happening here? So we're watching that happen, but so the focus on rescue is incredibly important, but it's so powerful. Prevention is so powerful, and I think sometimes, it's easier to think about how to rescue and solve the problem, to just stop, like, go get and it's over, than it is to really think through how it's all woven and knit together to know how to get in. Like, what are we actually trying to
Right.
prevent? Because it goes so deep. So I think one of the things that is really fascinating to me, as you talk about exploitation, child abuse, and trafficking, you kind of have those in three statements, categories. Can you help parents understand how you define each of those and how they're different? Because I think a lot of times parents hear trafficking. I mean, if you don't want to believe that comprehensive sex ed is happening in the classrooms, and you don't want to believe porn is happening, you certainly don't. Like, trafficking, not my child, is a very easy thing to say. So will you help break those three things down? Because it opens parents' eyes up to, this is more than you think it is.
Right. Well, when we hear the term abuse or sexual abuse, it's really like a noun to describe an act, right? Which is horrific and awful. When that act becomes exploitive, where they're getting a gain, the perpetrator is getting some sort of gain, and that is really where we move to the all-encompassing term of exploitation. And trafficking is a form of exploitation, but trafficking is actually the actual charge, the describing the type of exploitation. And most
So
times
good.
it's for monetary gain. So something of value is being exchanged, and the victim is, being recruited, transported. But in some cases, they don't have to be transported. So it's important for people to understand people can be trafficked out of their own bedroom with just being on a computer without ever leaving the bedroom. So people get that one wrong sometimes, but it's really something is being exchanged, and the mechanism of force, fraud, or coercion is being used. So that's really when we say that there's certain crime of trafficking that has taken place. Whereas exploitation is explaining all of it. It's all exploitation. When we see a kid whose parents are turning them into an influencer, and they're engaging in adult behavior, sexually provocative, foul language, and their parents are, monetizing that or getting some sort of gain, that's a form of exploitation. Where it becomes trafficking is if they're asking the kid, to engage in a commercial sex act, or something that breaks the law, and that then the parents are getting that monetary gain. Then that is actually a trafficking charge. So it gets a little confusing sometimes. And I
Right.
think you're mentioning my band TEDx talk. I talked about this and the difference. So it's important for people to understand.
So when you say children can be exploited from their bedroom, and parents have no idea that they are being exploited, can you give one or two examples of what a parent, like, just give one or two examples of exactly what that would mean, so that parents can make the connection to, oh, I didn't think about it that way.
Right. Well, two cases come to mind where I helped the family and advocated for the victims in those cases. And one of them was a typical sextortion case where the young woman
Yeah.
was, she was a high school athlete, very like had a middle class upbringing, parents who were very involved. And you would never expect this child to have been trafficked. But she was trafficked through sextortion because she was in a situation where she thought she was talking to somebody that she was in a relationship with. And they asked her to send nude photos. And, that just escalated into videos. And if she didn't keep sending them, they would, threaten to release it to the school or to her friends, or basically her parents, ruin her reputation. And out of that fear, she kept sending that content. And that we know that is sextortion, but it's also trafficking because that person was actually selling it, uploading it, monetizing that. So that was a trafficking case, and she never actually physically left her bedroom. She was not
Yeah.
scooped up in a van, school. None of that happened to her. It was just digitally through these private DM conversations, and I believe that case was through Snapchat. So that's one case. And then the other one is, actually a friend of mine now. She's a very outspoken survivor, and she was trafficked from school, where the perpetrator, the traffickers would actually pick her up from school, check her out. Nobody, didn't violate any laws at the time, and nobody stopped it from happening. She was also from a middle class family. Parents were involved. I think she was a high school cheerleader at the time. So again, you wouldn't expect this to be happening. And she would leave every day, and she'd be exploited during the day, and then return back, come home, and nobody saw the signs for
And
so
parents had
long.
no
So
idea.
no idea
Parents
this was
had no
happening in
idea.
either case. They were completely shocked when they found out.
And the school, as long as someone's asking for a child to leave, the school was okay with that. I mean,
They,
no big
I
deal.
think they would. I don't know exactly what was written on the form, but they're allowed to leave for appointments or things like that, and there's nobody really checking into it. And recently, we've seen legislation out of California and some other
Right.
states where basically they're saying parents don't have authority. The mature minor doctrine applies so that the child can check themselves out and to go to Planned Parenthood or wherever they have a private, or a, ally meeting with the GLSEN representative or whoever it is. The parents are kept in the dark about these things. And that was what was happening at the school, is that they weren't notified that, a friend or someone came to check their child out and was doing so every day.
Yeah, I think this is so important because we're talking a lot, and I think parents are waking up to the fact that maybe there's curriculum or there's surveys that are happening in the classroom, or maybe Planned Parenthood is coming in and they're not being informed. I don't think any parent in their right mind would ever consider the fact that their child would be leaving campus and coming back and then getting in the carpool line with them, and nobody would notify them, or nobody would know. And yet it's happening not just in the state here and there. It is common practice. Am I right about I mean, this happens all the
Right.
time.
Yeah, and I think that the bigger issue is parents don't understand the school policies. So they just, are not, they're assuming like this is just common sense, right? Like I've seen Pam at the front desk. I waved to her. She seems nice. She's not going to let my kid like check out of school with some random stranger who's a trafficker. We just assume we have a trust and we drop our kids off for 8 hours a day at these, places. And we don't think this is going to happen, but really the policies, if we're unaware of how they can be exploited and used by people who want to exploit other people, it really benefits them. A lot of these policies are so vague, or a lack of implementation, or non-existent to begin with. And we really don't know till we dive in and really ask the questions of, hey, what is your school policy on keeping secrets from parents regarding health, regarding checking my kid out, from school. Can they just leave at any time? Will I be notified? When you teach sex ed, am I going to be notified? Can I opt out? Like, these are the things parents need to be asking, and not, just setting everything on default of, well, notify me when there's a problem. I think that passive, way of doing things is just,
Yeah.
it's outdated, and it's not serving our
It's
families.
over. Right.
Yeah.
I think it's over. I can remember years ago when, parents were sort of waking up to, wait a minute, I can't go into a school during the school day. I'm not allowed in the halls and that sort of thing. And that, like, why wouldn't we be able to go in to the schools? That's a decade ago. But I think part of the problem, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is parents have no idea these are the questions that they need to be asking. This is not what we maybe grew up in. You have no idea what to ask, and reading the fine print. So much of this information is in the fine print, even medical information in the stacks and stacks of paper that you get at the beginning of the year, and nobody's really ever read it. And so I love that you're helping parents understand what questions to ask, because I think that's part of the hurdle. Most don't mind asking if they know, but it just doesn't cross their mind. So, okay,
Right.
how about this?
Absolutely.
I'm curious, are there some statistics that are off the top of your head, that you share that most parents probably wouldn't know, or again, wouldn't know to ask, but some just general statistics about exploitation, maybe trafficking, or just the dangers that our kids are walking in that rise to the top when you speak?
Sure. I mean, for years, I always cite the latest NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, their statistics, because they have the best idea of what the need is based on calls to their hotline or reports to their hotline. So just a few years ago, it was 32 million reports of suspected online recruitment, exploitation of children online. So that's a pretty high number. And now it's gotten even bigger. I think now it's close to 40 million reports. It might even be higher. So that's the last time I checked. And so that is telling us that most of the exploitation and trafficking that's happening is happening online. And that's a huge, huge problem. So I think that's the biggest statistic, I think, that really applies to all of our lives, because we have control over that. We have control over whether our kids have access to these devices and what kind of access and how they're using it, where they're using it. I think that is really important. And depending on which organization or what statistics you'll see 1 in 3 children victim of sexual abuse or exploitation, or 1 in 4. Primarily females are exploited more at an increased rate than boys are, but boys are also exploited. So I try not to fixate too much on those, because a victim is a victim, and I think it's more important to focus on, like, how they're exploited. What are the qualities and circumstances of why some kids are more vulnerable than others? And one thing I would just say I really differ from as an advocate for children is a lot of organizations, very well-funded big NGOs, will say, okay, LGBTQ kids are disproportionately affected. Black children are disproportionately affected. And they'll say because of racism or because of discrimination, because so many families are kicking their LGBTQ kids to the curb. And it's just such a lie, and it's such, it's not accurate information. And the reason that those groups are disproportionately, exploited and are vulnerable is we know that, poverty, it affects the Black community at an increased rate. And that is the bigger risk factor. As far as the LGBTQ, those children are exposed to sexual content at earlier and earlier ages by asking, what do you identify as? All of these identity movements and agendas cross, with the sexual agendas. I mean, there's no separating the two. And I've been very firm on that since the beginning of advocating on this issue. So that is why these children, when they're told to go online to the Trevor Project and they're talking to some counselor who's not even a vetted counselor about what kind of sexual positions that they've tried. I mean, this is sexualizing a child. I see it as exploiting a child, and they're doing it for all sorts of gain. But these are huge, risk factors that nobody talks about as to why these populations are exploited at an increased rate and are more vulnerable.
Well, I want to get a little bit deeper in that, but will you just stop for a second and share about the Trevor Project, which is something that it's even hard to believe, but how it's used and what it is, because it's fairly common and parents would have no idea about this, much less what it is, what it appears to be and what it actually is and what's happening. So will you give just a little snippet about the Trevor Project in and of itself?
Sure. Well, it's a nonprofit that, its social aims are to help be a lifeline for resource for at-risk LGBTQ youth. And they're propped up by all sorts of celebrities. You'll see Heather Dubrow, the Housewives. I mean, all of these people propping this organization up, and they're very well funded. And the left wing, political sphere also props them up. And they'll say that these children, they're suicidal. They need access to this hotline, but we've exposed this hotline, and so have many other people now. This happened years ago where we would do a chat on this hotline, and they have this first thing, this quick escape feature that they have. So they're teaching kids, secrecy, that if, a parent walks in, there's this quick escape mechanism to hide the whole chat, hide the whole conversation of that you're even at the website. So it's really, the way that they do it is just really sneaky and gross. Then they have these private conversations, these private groups. And I don't know what it looks like now, but as of, I think, not too long ago, you could talk to a counselor, and these counselors are, like I said, are not vetted counselors. They're not that it would make much of a difference, if we're being honest, because some of these counselors are pushing this agenda. But the fact that there really isn't a high, level of accountability and, just they're not really screening these children for anything, or reporting it, or upstreaming them if they're victims of abuse, calling, that isn't happening. There's no oversight. It's really just a way to lure these children in to a false sense of belonging, a false sense of protection, and feed them back sexually explicit conversation, content, and resources. And some of those resources include these adult porn books. I mean, and some of those books also in resources, because in our conversation with them, it went directly to, I think it was, this book is gay, and it might have been another one as well that suggests, them looking at porn. So it's just a hop, skip, and a jump from sexually exploiting a child, or teaching them how to exploit themselves. And that's really the scary part, because we were talking about, you and I have had conversations about the OnlyFans culture and all of that. And really, it plays right into the hands of these vulnerable kids seeking belonging, meaning, away in this world.
Yeah, and leadership, right? And so what parents also don't understand is the Trevor Project is not something that just falls out of the sky and your kids, happen to bump into it. There are books at school that are being assigned with QR codes in the books that take the student directly to the Trevor Project and to these lines and to the people that you don't know anything about. So it's not just that it's out there and being used, it's that in places that should be safe, with authority figures that should be safe, they're being handed or posted QR codes to go to these sites that are then leading them into darker places. And now they have it. Now they formed a relationship or whatever. So it's a terrible thing, but it's also the means by which they're getting to it is also very sneaky in books that are being assigned in the classroom. That parents would have no
I remember
idea.
I took my kids to the library, and we were looking in one little section, and it was almost like this hidden little poster on the wall. And it said, if you've been abused, or if you need support, or I think it was like mental health resources or something like that, if you need support, call this number. It didn't say Trevor Project. It didn't say, what it was. And there was a QR code for the, and of course I snapped it and it went to the Trevor Project. So they're finding ways to lure these children onto these platforms at school, in libraries, in medical offices, and you'll find high medical institutions endorsing these types of organizations that are doing this to children, and even the library associations as well.
Gracious. It's so much. We were talking before we just started. It's just so much for parents to understand. So I love just breaking it down. My whole thing about this podcast is informed parents make informed decisions. So just having the information so you can take one step to understand a little bit more. One step. I love that you say this, that really yes, legislation is important. I want to talk about that in just a second. But a lot of this starts at home. A lot of the prevention starts underneath the roof. And so, can you talk to parents just a little bit more about your passion behind not just prevention, but starting at home and the things that they can do that are not terribly difficult?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, my nonprofit Freedom Forever, we have this free resource for parents called the Parenting Revolution Manual. And it is a really great resource we put together to help protect kids from the inside out. And it is harder than ever being a parent. I'm a parent, and
Yeah.
I can't imagine, my younger self having to face all of these things as a parent that we're facing today. There's just so many things that we have to worry about, and protect our homes from the inside out. And I wanted to provide parents with the resources that I use, that I've figured out the hard way, and the mistakes I've made. And I don't want other parents to have to make those mistakes. I don't want other parents to be in a situation where they don't have resources. But the great news is we have choices. I mean, technology is moving so fast, and we have the ability, things are changing so rapidly. We have the ability to opt in to things that we want, and encourage the growth of those platforms, or digital device resources, entertainment, whatever it is, medical systems, whatever we choose will grow. And so if we don't want our child, exploited at the doctor or sexualized at the doctor, we need to make sure our pediatricians are on the same page, that there's not going to be a private conversation where they ask our kids pronouns behind our back, things like that. So every aspect of our lives, from the pediatrician's office to therapists, resources, to schools that we choose, to entertainment that comes into our homes, to books, to how we use our devices, digital safety skills. We call them digital self-defense skills. And one thing that I think is really important that we do in our house is devices are never allowed in their rooms. So they're protected devices. We have routers that protect from porn and any explicit type of content. But also, we just have a rule, like you're not going to be on your phone or on your laptop or anything in your room. You're going to be in a public place where there's other people in our house, whether it be a kitchen or our living room. So that's really important. I also have a kid who's very into tech. So I was like, how do I navigate this? This is really difficult.
This is
And
such a
I
great
think,
point, though.
yeah,
I
and I
mean,
think
really,
that,
like no
yeah.
social media, but what do you do? Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that there's ways that we can teach our kids how to engage with this world, because, for example, YouTube. Most kids will have access to YouTube Junior, or YouTube. And I think that the ways that we choose to do it, like for us as a family, we choose, if we're watching like YouTube videos, like as a family in our living room, because we know like the account, what screen content there is, what channels they're allowed to watch, things like that, rather than a like banning policy, like you're not allowed to do this and everything is bad, and this kind of fear mentality, because our kids are exposed to other children, they're exposed to the world, and if they fear it and they don't know how to, at an age appropriate way, engage in it in a safe way, then I think that we're not setting them up to succeed. And some people have different opinions on that, and I think that everybody knows their kids best. But if you had to pin me down at a number, because I've been asked this so many times, especially for federal legislation advisories, like, what is the age? And I would say it's 16, and the reason is I have a 16-year-old and she did not get social media until she was 16. At 15, we created like a account for her that we navigated with her. So I would have a year to show her how the internet exploits them, how algorithms work, all of that. And we kind of did a digital safety run with them before she got social media access to it. And she still uses it for a purpose. But anyway, what I was saying with 16 is, they're off, they're driving, they can get a driver's license, they can basically be alone in the world behind, the wheel, and they're essentially acting as an adult in
They're
many
making their own
capacities, even though
decisions.
they're not an adult
Yeah.
yet. So I really believe we're doing them a disservice if by 16 we have not prepared them. They don't have the digital self-defense skills. Just like as a parent, we wouldn't put them behind a wheel if they didn't, know world safety skills, like street smarts, like when you're at a gas station, don't go at night if you're, a young woman, like all those little things we teach them, we need to teach them in the tech world as well. So that's what we do in our family, and that's what I recommend. That before 16, it's just a hard no. But again, everybody knows their parent. Every parent knows their child the best, and they just need to have those parameters of, hey, if you're going to be using YouTube, if you're going to be making content, if that's your passion and what you want to do, these are the parameters, so that they're doing it in a safe way where they're never going to be in a position where a predator can access them, or pornography can access them.
So I love that no social media does not mean no tech. I think that's just a quick takeaway for parents so they don't panic that they have to say no to everything. Know your child, know what their propensity, know what they lean into, know what they love. That's a great way to navigate that. So I want to stay sort of on this whole app thing here for a minute because, again, I want parents to be informed. And I think there are some apps and activities that parents have maybe heard of and maybe not heard of that are really very popular, and they're not understanding who is using these apps. You know, we have an idea. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, that's those people kind of thing. And it's not the case. So there are two in particular I want to talk about. Maybe a third one will even come while I'm talking. But can you talk a little bit about OnlyFans? What it is, what it isn't. And I don't know if you have statistics on OnlyFans. I do have a couple of friends whose children have gotten involved, kind of sucked in. But will you just talk a little bit about that and how much it's like growing?
Yeah, I think it's a really big problem. It
Yeah.
used to be that kids wanted to all become influencers because that was what was trendy in the culture, and they could see that they could monetize that. And I think that the attitudes about sex and sexuality have really shifted with this whole push of gender ideology, and comprehensive sexuality education as well, because there's this idea that being a sex worker is legitimate. It's an honorable form of work like any other work. And they really started with that term, sex worker, instead of prostitute or prostitution.
Yeah.
And that took the shame, the stigma away that I think is necessary as kind of a red flag of like, hey, this is a high risk activity that you're, you don't want to engage in for various reasons. They stopped doing that. They stopped teaching that. And instead, they are promoting culture, which is express yourself, sexually. And what is your sexual identity? And I think that makes kids in particular much more vulnerable because they see this as a form of self-expression and not of self-exploitation. And I think that is the biggest thing. They're not really understanding that sexualizing yourself has consequences and it makes you more
Right.
vulnerable to predators and exploitation. So when they turn 18, like this young big influencer just did, the second she turned 18, she made $1 million and she hadn't even, I think, uploaded a video yet. The fact that we know there's such a demand for these minors, for these kids to be exploited, I think that it's a really scary thing. And I think that these kids know that there is a demand for it because
Yeah.
all of these influencers are being elevated in the algorithm. So they'll see, their favorite influencers say, "Oh, well, I have an OnlyFans account. Look at this bag. Look at this new, ride that their new Jeep or whatever." And they're, "Oh, I want that. I want those things." And it's not so bad. They become desensitized to the means of getting those things. So I think that's like really the most toxic thing that's happened in our culture is that there's no shame, there's no red flag around these high risk behaviors.
And with OnlyFans, I mean they build their own account and post whatever it is that they want to post, but they also it moves into people asking, "Will you share a picture of this? Will you share this activity? Where will you?" And the price goes up, so they're making tons of money. And
Right.
can go as far as they want to go, and it's kind of hidden, and they have their own name, and they've changed their name and all the things, and so it's so common and so dangerous, and I think very difficult to get out of because if you've made $1 million in a couple of days, where are you
Hmm.
going to go to actually make that kind of money at that age? So it really is so dangerous. There's another one that
Absolutely.
I think people know about OnlyFans more than they know about this one, but this has grown as well. And the sugar baby or sugar baby universities. I don't think parents know about this, but they're actually ranked. I mean, you can Google it and say what are the top sugar baby universities in the country. Can you explain a little bit about what that is, and that parents may want to ask the question if their kids have ever heard of this?
Right. Well, it's like modern day escort services. It's like Craigslist, before it got taken down or Backpage. Um, it's a way for, I mean, legal exploitation to occur, especially, with minors, because there's no oversight of how old these, people are that are trying to access each other, just like any other social media platform. There's not age verification. So it's a very big problem. And I think the same thing that happens with the OnlyFans, the girls that are doing that, is they talk themselves into saying, oh, well, there's a big demand for feet pics. And they're like, well, it's just my
Right.
feet. It's not really a sexual thing. I'm just going to send my feet and I'm going to make money. And they get into this entry level, self exploitation. And that escalates because they realize they can make more money. Oh, well, maybe if I just do this next thing or this next thing. And that's exactly the same cycle every, woman or man who's been trapped in exploitation has gone through, that desensitization grooming process. So these platforms are designed to groom vulnerable girls into thinking, oh, it's just one date with this, sugar daddy. It's just, he just wants to go on a date. I don't have to sleep with him. I'm just going on a date and I get a free dinner out of it. And so that's how they get in the door. And it's the same thing with OnlyFans. It's just feet pics. It's just this, and it won't escalate, and then it very, very quickly does.
Very quickly does. Yes, yes, it's huge. Okay, one more on this topic. Talk a little bit about algorithms. And I don't know if there's a specific detail, but just I can't remember the stat that I read, and this has been a couple of years ago. But if a young girl is on, let's say, TikTok, and she is looking up something about body image, it's like 30 seconds before, or something crazy, before the algorithm starts to load about eating disorders or to follow that. It's the same thing just with any topic. But if they Google, or if they put in one thing and they're searching, the algorithm is so fast. It's not even a minute. Can you talk a little bit about that so parents understand where are kids, if you say depression, it's suicidal ideation starts to load. And so the seeds get planted and really get watered pretty quickly.
Right. Well, it's kind of like when you do a Google search or you talk about something you need and suddenly you have ads on Instagram. It's like, I was like, gosh, we need a new vacuum. Our vacuum does not do a good job. And all of a sudden I got these ads for vacuums, not just on Instagram, but on Google as well. So it's the same kind of concept that you can search something or search something in the sphere of what the algorithm will give back to you, but you can also just be profiled as, oh, this is a mom who has 4 kids. She's going to be vacuuming, or she's going to need a vacuum. These are kids. So these are young kids. They're like, oh, they're in a time where they're discovering their identity and they want a sense of belonging and they want to connect with influencers. We're going to serve them up the influencers that they choose. And unfortunately, the influencers that have these huge accounts that are monetized get paid by OnlyFans to promote OnlyFans, get paid by Facebook, Meta, whatever it is, to promote certain agendas or content. And so, when you think about capitalizing on vulnerabilities, specifically girls with the eating disorders, this is really one of the big areas that exploded because it was so obvious that how quickly that content was served up. So you'd have girls that would maybe be struggling, with their identity, and they would be served up content of, this is how you become bulimic. This is how you can count your calories. This is the cream that Kim Kardashian is selling so you can get thinner quicker. And so they exploit vulnerabilities in children, and not even necessarily intentionally. It's just the way the algorithm works. In some cases, I do believe it's intentional. But it's the same thing with the gender ideology. How did it grow so quickly out of nowhere? Well, if you talk to a lot of these detransitioners like I have, and that we've made films with them and we advocate for them, they say, well, I was on TikTok and I saw these influencers and they looked so happy once they transitioned, and I was depressed and I came from a broken home, and it seemed like they were happy and they were getting these endorsement deals, and I just wanted that life. It's the same thing. They're the answer to problems. And I think that as parents, like, we have to know our children and know what it is that all kids are looking for. And that's a sense of identity and belonging. And if we're not giving them those things, they will be searching online, and they're not wrong for doing so. It's on us to protect them, but they're looking for those things that they're not getting at home. And so that's where they become more vulnerable. And then social media swoops in, and these agendas swoop in with their evil tentacles, and it's really hard to undo once it's done.
Yeah, it really is. Well, talk a little bit, as we start to wrap up, talk a little bit about your work with legislation. So you mentioned a little bit, but I mean, you're quite involved with legislation. So what do you do? But then also the importance of parents understanding what's going on in legislation, not just in their state, but really just generally speaking, what are we seeing? And then what are a couple of the policies that you're either pushing for or you're saying warning, 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 everybody needs to know? That was kind of a loaded question, but
Right.
legislation in general.
Yeah. Sure, I think it's so important for people to be involved
Hmm.
in that. And, people say I hate politics. I hate politics too. I don't think anybody
Yeah,
likes
I mean,
politics.
worse and worse every day, right?
Right. And it's not fun by any means. And there's so much ick that goes with that term. But being involved, especially as Christians, like it's our civic duty to be in these places where big decisions are made. And I always tell my kids, if you can't make a decision, one will be made for you. And they don't
That's
generally
right.
like the decision or the shoes I pick out or the dinner I pick out. So it's the same thing for us as adults. If we're not involved in how our cities are run and the laws that are happening, that could negatively impact our families, well, a decision will be made for us. And so, specifically, the legislation that I've been really passionate and involved in started in Tennessee with banning child mutilation procedures and sexually explicit all ages adult shows, which some will say well, is the drag bills, but it's really, I don't want any adult undressing in front of a child. I don't care if they're drag, gay, straight, whatever
Right,
their
right.
agenda is. I think it's all inappropriate. So,
Pretty common
these are
knowledge. Yeah.
right, right. These are common sense things that you think would be common sense in our laws already, but apparently they weren't. And so it's a very long process to get lawmakers on board and have the right language and all of that. And we're so blessed that the last bill, the child mutilation bill that went to the Supreme Court, was upheld by the Supreme Court, and so it's standard. And now it's a template and a precedent for all these other states to enact these same legislations to protect children. So I was really proud to be involved in that from the very beginning. And that started with me shouting, "Hey, this is happening! Look at the Vanderbilt transgender, child clinic here that we have," and people saying, "Oh, that's not happening." So it starts from a place of denial; it's not happening, to using your voice, advocating, join with other parents, and then eventually you get a ball rolling, you get people to pay attention, and ultimately, I think that the catalyst for those bills getting passed was the stars, the survivors that came to speak about the impact. So that was, one bill that I'm very passionate about, or I guess two bills. And then I'm also passionate about the death penalty for child rapists. And that's something that on my nonprofit's website, we advocate for victims. And this is something that they want, and that is a long-term solution to repeat offenders who, I mean, the threshold is very high. You rape a child. It's not, suspected rape. It's not any of that. It's proven on camera, very high threshold for child rapists. So we have a consequences for child rapist map, so people can look on their state to see what kind of existing laws there are and penalties. And some people will be shocked to
That's
find
great.
very lenient sentencing for these most egregious crimes. So I'm very passionate about justice for survivors. And so those are a couple of things that we're working on.
I think it's so important. People laugh at me all the time. They're like, "You're in Georgia. Why are you constantly talking about what's happening in California and Colorado?" And I think, just setting the precedent. Like, once a bill passes and it gets through, it's so easy for it to become model legislation. Like what you just said, this is great model legislation because it's something that we're for protection. But model legislation comes out of terrible bills too. And so being aware of the things that are passing and being aware of what's happening so that you're aware in your own state and can start to speak like, not here, and this is how it got through, and here's the language. It's so important both ways. And so I so appreciate just your work in that area and waking parents up. It's hard. It's hard. And it's not really fun to run down to the Capitol for the day. I mean, it's not really fun. It's really hard. So thank you for stepping
Yeah,
out and for leading in that way.
thank you.
Let's sort of wrap up with this: the war on children. Unbelievable documentary. But will you just talk a little bit about what it is, why you did it, and what you hope happens with it? Because it really is a tremendous, tremendous work.
Sure. Well, it's a documentary my husband and I did. My husband has a background in film. He directed award-winning celebrities, and he ultimately decided to leave Hollywood. And for the same thing, we both decided to set our careers on fire and join in this activism space because we had kids and we wanted to make a better future for them. And I think that's really what motivates both of us. But also, it's the fact that when we realized we had these problems, whether it was in the sex trafficking world or in just the school space, we would tell people like these things are happening. Use our ways, use our platform, and people just didn't believe us. I mean, some people did, but the people that had the ability to change things didn't believe us or didn't want to make it their fight or their issue. And it was also people that were just in denial, right? So a lot of, friends on maybe more left leaning just said this isn't happening or this isn't what I've been told. There's no porn in schools. So we really needed one place, especially with all the censorship online and elsewhere, where people could get information and undeniable, unassailable facts right in their face. I mean, when you watch this documentary, as so many have, over 60 million, I think it was the most watched documentary of last year, you can't deny that these things are happening, and the people who said it and the people behind these agendas, it's on camera. So there's a lot of footage of just straight from the horse's mouth, not just us saying what we think. And I think that's really putting that all together in one place in a cohesive way for people to understand the war on children and all the different aspects that it's affecting children and families. It helps people really understand and envision, okay, I understand the war. I understand the battle. I understand all the mechanisms that are coming and how they're doing this. And now I feel more empowered to stop it. It's heavy, yes, but I know what I can do to stop it. I think that's really what made the film so powerful. And initially, we didn't spend $1 in advertising. And it was just word of mouth, and it was big influencers tweeting it out, like Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. and all these people, and people watching it themselves and just word of mouth. So it's pretty incredible we did it without doing any ad spend, especially since they tried so hard to ban this film in so many places. And now it's available, I think, on Fox Nation and on Prime. So the tides have totally shifted. And I think that is just such a indicative of such a profound cultural change that is happening. And it's very exciting to see.
It's so exciting. Well, and they can find you at Freedom Forever as well. And just get on social media and just follow. But your work is just incredible. And I'm so appreciative, so helpful. And I love just that war on children ending there, because it really is kind of an overarching picture. It's important to know the pieces, but when you see the whole picture, it really does become more believable for things that are really just unbelievable. Really, it's understandable that people do not believe and don't want to believe because it's not fun. But thank you for doing the work to knit it all together and present it in such a way that parents can really understand and take action. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. And thank you so much for all the work that you do. It's so important. And I love Think Media and what you're doing on your podcast.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, parents, I hope that you really enjoyed that. I am telling you, The War on Children, that documentary is absolutely profound. In fact, we watched it once, my husband and I, and then we invited a group of people to watch it with us so that we could discuss it, so that we could confront it, and so that we could have conversations. I think it's really worth doing that. It's incredibly well done. What I love about this is not just the information and not just the overarching conversation and those pockets of really understanding what's happening, but maybe even more so the example that Landon and her husband Robbie set of saying, hey, we're going to burn our career to the ground and we're going to actually go for this. We're going to step out. I think so many people are waking up and so many people are willing to take a step, but they have gone absolutely all in. They saw the need for their own children. They were able to connect the dots in what was really happening, and they've been able to really knit it together well so that parents can understand it, so that you know what steps you can take. The other thing that I love about it is she reminds us it starts at home. So one step might be fixing the router or fixing a piece of, something that you're doing in your home that maybe the doors are opened a little bit too wide and you maybe you just didn't know what they were exposed to. Or there's a conversation you can have with your teenager or your college student about some of these things that you didn't know about and now you do. So I would just encourage you to really take time with this. Think about the one step that you can take. Think about the conversation that you can have, and then just have the courage to have it. Do it with a friend. Talk to your friends about it. Invite them into the conversation and sit with the documentary to say, it's not just my opinion. Here are the facts. Facts are powerful. And that's why we have the Informed Parent Podcast, because informed parents make informed decisions. So I hope this particular episode helps you to parent with purpose, disciple with direction, and leave an intentional legacy.